Okay, so King Ahaz
Yeah.
finds himself in a real predicament here.
Oh, absolutely.
Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the king of Israel, have ganged up on him.
Yeah, they've joined forces.
They've joined forces against him, and things are not looking good.
No, they're not.
Not looking good at all.
You can just imagine
And anxiety. And Second Nephi 17.2 really kind of lays it out there. It says, and it came to pass.
It came to pass.
That Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it. But could not prevail against it.
Right, but they couldn't win.
So they're under siege.
Yes.
And it's at this moment of crisis that God steps in.
Yes, he does.
And he tells Isaiah to go find Ahaz and to deliver a message of reassurance.
To calm him down.
He says to take heed and be quiet, fear not. Neither be faint-hearted for the two tails of these smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria, and of the son of Remaliah.
That's 2 Nephi 17.4.
That is verse 4.
It's interesting how God uses the term smoking firebrands to describe these kings.
Yes.
On the surface, they seem very threatening. But God is reminding Ahaz that their power is ultimately fleeting.
Right. It's very temporary.
Very temporary.
And then there's more to the message than just calming Ahaz down.
Right.
God also reveals the true intentions of Syria and Israel.
He reveals their plan.
In verses 5 and 6, we learn that their plan is to conquer Judah.
They want to take over.
And they want to install their own puppet king.
Yeah, it says, let us go up against Judah and vex it, and let us make a breach therein for us, and set a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabeel.
That's 2 Nephi 17.6.
That's right.
But God, in his infinite wisdom, sees through their schemes.
He sees right through it.
And he says, it shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass.
2 Nephi 17.7.
Verse 7.
Powerful.
So their plans are going to fail.
They are.
But God goes on to prophesy even more.
Yeah, he does.
He talks about the downfall of both of these kingdoms.
Right.
Verse 8 says, for the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. And within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken, that it be not a people.
So Ephraim will be broken.
Ephraim will be broken, yeah.
Within 65 years.
And their kingdoms will crumble.
They will.
God gives a very specific timeline.
Yes, he does.
And it's really a remarkable display of God's foreknowledge and power.
But then it gets even more interesting.
Even more interesting because God offers Ahaz a sign.
Yeah.
A way to strengthen his faith.
He says,
ask thee a sign of the Lord thy God. Ask it either in the depth or in the height above.
That's verse 11.
That's verse 11.
Ask me for anything.
Ask me for anything, any proof you need.
Anything.
It just shows how much God wants to connect with us.
And build our faith.
And to build our faith.
But
then Ahaz refuses.
Refuses the offer.
He says, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord.
2 Nephi 17.12.
That's verse 12.
What an interesting response.
Such a curious response, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, maybe he thinks he's being humble. Or maybe he's afraid of what he might see.
That could be.
But God gently calls him out.
Yeah.
In verse 13. He says, hear ye now, O house of David. Is it a small thing for you to weary men? But will ye weary my God also?
2 Nephi 17.13.
It's almost like God is saying, don't you trust me?
Don't you trust me enough to ask?
Don't you see this as an opportunity to grow closer?
It's all about building a relationship.
Yeah.
And deepening our relationship.
Even in this rebuke, there's a sense of love and patience.
Absolutely.
But then the story takes a dramatic turn.
It does.
Because God gives a sign anyway.
A sign anyway.
He says, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel.
2 Nephi 17.14.
Verse 14.
The prophecy of Emmanuel.
The prophecy of Emmanuel, yeah.
Incredible.
It's incredible.
Virgin birth.
The virgin birth.
Yeah.
It points directly to the coming of Jesus Christ.
Yes, it does.
The Messiah.
A Messiah.
And it's not just a reassurance to Ahaz.
Right.
This is for all mankind.
It is a message of hope for all mankind.
It really is.
For everyone.
And then it's tied to a very specific timeline.
Yes, it is.
God says, for before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings.
That's verse 16.
Verse 16.
Wow.
So before this child
Before he even
reaches the age of understanding,
the age of understanding,
the lands that Ahaz fears will be desolate.
So much is happening here.
It's incredible.
So much foreshadowing. It's
Oh.
amazing.
But the chapter doesn't end on a totally positive note,
No, it doesn't.
because there are still consequences
So are.
to be faced,
Right.
even with the promise of a Savior.
Yeah.
Verse 17 says, "The Lord shall bring upon thee and upon thy people and upon thy father's house days that have not come from the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Assyria."
2 Nephi 17:1.
So even with the hope of Emmanuel,
Right.
there's a shadow of judgment hanging over Ahaz and his people.
There is.
And it's a reminder that our choices have real consequences.
Our choices do have real consequences.
And those consequences are spelled out pretty explicitly
Yeah, they are.
in verse 18.
It says,
"And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall hiss for the fly that is in the uttermost part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria."
2 Nephi 17:18.
The flies and the bees, they
It
symbolize
symbolizes the army
the vast armies descending upon Judah.
descending upon Judah.
And it really paints a picture of overwhelming force,
Overwhelming force.
something that's going to be tough to overcome.
Very difficult.
Yeah.
And, the invasion is not just a military conquest. There's a humiliating aspect to it as well.
It talks about the Assyrian king forcing the people to shave.
Yes.
"In the same day shall the Lord shave with a razor that is hired, namely by them beyond the river, by the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the feet. And it shall also consume the beard."
That's verse 20.
Verse 20.
I know.
And this is a symbol of subjugation.
It is stripping away their identity and pride,
Yeah, bringing them low.
bringing them low.
And it gets worse,
It does.
because Judah, which was a prosperous land,
Yes, it was.
is going to be devastated.
Devastated by this invasion.
It says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that a man shall nourish a young cow and 2 sheep, and it shall come to pass for the abundance of milk that they shall give, he shall eat butter. For butter and honey shall everyone eat that is left in the land."
Verses 21 and 22.
Verses 21 and 22, they're reduced to bare minimum, just trying to survive.
Just trying to survive.
And it's not just food that's going to be scarce.
No, it's
Their whole way of life is going to change.
completely change.
Verse 23 and 24 say, "And it shall come to pass in that day that every place shall be where there were 1,000 vines and 1,000 silverlings, it shall even be for briars and thorns. With arrows and with bows shall men come thither, because all the land shall become briars and thorns."
So the vineyards, once a symbol of prosperity,
Yeah.
overgrown and useless.
Overgrown and useless, yeah.
What a change.
And then verse 25, we see the final blow.
Okay.
"And on all hills that shall be digged with the mattock, there shall not come thither the fear of briars and thorns. But it shall be for the sending forth of oxen and for the treading of lesser cattle.
Wow.
Even the hillsides, which they once carefully cultivated,
Right.
are abandoned, fit only for grazing."
Just grazing.
Yeah, it's a poignant picture of the desolation that awaits them.
Poignant is a good word for it.
It's a lot to take in,
It is.
all this talk of judgment and hardship.
It is.
But even in the midst of this bleak prophecy,
Yeah.
there's a thread of hope running through it.
There is.
The promise of Emmanuel remains.
The promise remains. It's interesting how 2 Nephi 17 weaves together these threads of judgment and hope.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have these descriptions of the hardships that await Ahaz and his people. But then on the other hand,
Right.
there's this incredible prophecy of Emmanuel,
Yeah.
a promise that God is still with them, that he hasn't abandoned them.
Yeah, it's like, life is full of ups and downs.
Absolutely.
And in our darkest moments, we can find comfort in knowing that God is with us.
Yeah, and that he's working things out for our good.
He's orchestrating events
He is.
to bring about his plan of salvation.
It's amazing how
Yeah.
he does that.
It's like he's saying, I'm not some distant deity.
Right.
I'm here, I'm present.
And I'm working to redeem you.
Let's go back to verse 15 for a moment.
Okay.
It says, "Butter and honey shall he eat,
Mm-hmm.
that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good."
2 Nephi 17:15. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it really points to the idea of discernment.
Developing that ability to distinguish between right and wrong,
Mm-hmm.
to choose the path of righteousness.
And it's not something we're born with.
It's not.
It's something that we develop.
It is.
And it's a challenge
It's definitely a challenge.
to consistently choose the good,
Absolutely.
even when it's hard.
Especially when it's hard.
Yeah.
And, the consequences of those choices aren't always immediate.
No, they're not.
Sometimes it takes a while.
Sometimes it takes generations.
Generations, that's right.
to see how those choices play out.
2 Nephi 17 shows us
Yes, it does.
the long-term ramifications of both obedience and disobedience.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
see it all play out,
We see the consequences of Ahaz's decision to reject God's counsel,
right?
but we also see the hope that's offered through the prophecy of Emmanuel.
Yes, and that hope extends
Extends way beyond
Ahaz.
Ahaz and his immediate circumstances.
This is for everyone.
This is for everyone.
It's so relevant for us today.
It is.
It's not just a historical account. It's a timeless story about the nature of faith
And the importance of trusting in God's plan.
and the reality of consequences.
And, as we're talking about this, I keep thinking about verses 18 through 20.
Okay,
These verses describe the Assyrian invasion in such stark terms.
they really do.
The Lord shall hiss for the fly that is in the uttermost part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria.
2 Nephi 17.18.
Yeah, those flies and bees represent the overwhelming force of the Assyrian army.
The overwhelming force.
And then verse 20 says, In the same day shall the Lord shave with a razor that is hired, namely by them beyond the river, by the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the feet. And it shall also consume the beard.
It's a very powerful image.
It's brutal.
It is brutal.
It really drives home the point that the consequences of rejecting God's counsel are serious.
Very serious.
And I think it's also important to note the symbolism,
Yes.
the shaving.
It's not just physical.
It's a symbol of humiliation,
It is.
of being stripped.
Of their identity and power.
It's like they're being humbled.
By
The consequences of their actions.
And it's a reminder that pride
Pride.
can be a very dangerous thing.
It can be.
When we think we can do things our own way.
Yeah.
When we refuse to listen to God.
When we refuse to listen to God's guidance.
We set ourselves up for a fall.
And that fall can be devastating.
Devastating.
Not just for ourselves,
Right.
but for everyone around us.
The impact on the people of Judah is immense.
Think about it. Their land was ravaged,
Ravaged.
their homes destroyed, their way of life completely upended.
It makes you think about the importance of humility.
It does.
Acknowledging our need for God.
Recognizing our limitations
And our limitations.
and surrendering our will to His.
surrendering to His will.
That's when we open ourselves up to true blessing.
And I think that's especially relevant for us today.
It-
We live in a world that encourages self-reliance, independence, doing things on your own. But the scriptures teach us.
They teach us that true strength comes from acknowledging our dependence on God
Absolutely.
and seeking His wisdom.
in everything we do,
Yes.
it's not about being passive or weak.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, and we need God's grace and guidance to navigate this life.
As we go deeper into these verses, I'm struck by the contrast
Yeah.
between the devastation.
Described in verses 21 through 25,
Right.
and the hope offered through the prophecy of Emmanuel.
Yeah.
It's like we're being shown the consequences of our choices
Right.
and the possibility of redemption.
It's like God is saying, yes, there will be times of hardship,
Times of consequence.
but I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm working to redeem you, to restore you.
To bring you back to a place of wholeness.
Exactly. And that
It's
redemption,
about being transformed.
transform,
It's about becoming more like Christ.
aligning our hearts and minds with His will.
Yeah, it's about experiencing true freedom,
True freedom.
which comes from living in a right relationship with God.
And that freedom is available to everyone,
It is.
regardless of our past mistakes.
Or our present circumstances.
Let's look at verses 21 and 22 a little closer.
Okay.
It says, And it shall come to pass in that day that a man shall nourish a young cow and 2 sheep. And it shall come to pass, for the abundance of milk that they shall give, he shall eat butter. For butter and honey shall every one eat that is left in the land.
It really paints a picture of scarcity.
It does. A land that was once prosperous,
Yeah.
reduced to bare subsistence.
It's a stark reminder that disobedience to God's commands leads to consequences.
It does.
And it's not just about material loss.
No, it's not.
There's a spiritual dimension to this as well.
Absolutely.
When we turn away from God, we create a void in our lives.
A void that can only be filled by Him.
That's right.
And I think Ahaz and his people experienced that firsthand.
Yeah.
They had material wealth, but they lacked that relationship with God.
And without that relationship,
It all means nothing.
yeah, nothing else matters.
One of the things that strikes me about these verses is the way they describe the transformation of the land.
Okay.
Verses 23 and 24 say, "And it shall come to pass in that day that every place shall be where there were 1,000 vines at 1,000 silverlings. It shall even be for briars and thorns. With arrows and with bows shall men come thither, because all the land shall become briars and thorns."
Those vineyards.
Once symbols of prosperity,
Yeah.
now overrun with thorns and briars.
What a powerful image of decay.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like a spiritual blight
The spiritual blight.
has settled over the land.
Yeah, mirroring the spiritual decay in the hearts of the people.
Exactly.
And even the hillsides, once carefully cultivated, are abandoned and desolate.
It's true.
Verse 25 says, "And on all hills that shall be digged with the mattock, there shall not come thither the fear of briars and thorns. But it shall be for the sending forth of oxen and for the treading of lesser cattle."
That's a poignant image
It is.
of how far they've fallen.
Yeah, how much they've lost.
Our choices have ripple effects.
They do.
They impact not just ourselves, but the world around us.
Yeah, when we choose to live in obedience to God's commands, we cultivate a flourishing in our lives.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the lives of those we touch.
And when we reject His guidance, we bring decay and desolation.
It's a message that's as relevant today as it was back then.
Absolutely. Our choices matter.
They shape our lives, our communities, the world around us.
You know, it's interesting how this passage uses these concrete, visceral images to convey these spiritual truths.
Yeah, the flies and the bees.
The shaving
the
floor,
thorns and briars.
the desolate hillsides.
Yeah,
These images would have resonated deeply with the original audience.
they resonate with us today.
They do.
They speak to something deep within us.
And that's what makes Scripture so powerful.
It does.
It speaks to us on multiple levels.
It engages our minds and our hearts.
It challenges us and comforts us.
Yeah, it's like a mirror,
A mirror.
reflecting back to us the truths about ourselves.
And the world we live in.
And a compass,
Guiding us.
guiding us towards the path of righteousness.
You know, as we talk about this,
Yeah.
I keep thinking about the importance of perspective.
Okay.
It would be easy to get bogged down in the judgment and the consequences.
Right.
But this is just one part of a much larger story.
It is.
A story that ultimately ends in redemption and hope.
That's a great point.
We can't lose sight of the bigger picture.
No, we can't.
Of God's love and mercy.
Even in judgment,
There's always hope.
there's hope.
There's always the possibility of turning back to God,
Of
repenting, and receiving His forgiveness.
and experiencing His restoration.
God's love is bigger than our mistakes.
It is.
His grace is sufficient,
It is.
and His desire is always to reconcile us to Himself.
To bring us back into a right relationship with Him.
Mm-hmm.
As we've been talking about these events from 2 Nephi 17,
Yeah,
I keep thinking about how these ancient stories still have meaning for us today.
they really do.
The challenges that King Ahaz faced, the warnings, the promises, they resonate with our own lives in such profound ways.
You know, the human experience transcends time and culture.
It does.
We all grapple with the same questions of faith, trust, obedience.
And we face similar temptations, similar struggles.
We do.
And ultimately, I think we're all looking for the same thing.
Yeah,
A sense of meaning and purpose.
absolutely.
A connection to something greater than ourselves.
Something bigger than us.
And that's where this story of Ahaz and the prophecy of Emmanuel becomes so powerful,
Yeah.
because it reminds us that even when we make mistakes,
Even when we mess up,
God is still with us.
God is still there.
He hasn't given up on us.
Right.
He's still working to redeem us,
To restore us, to bring us back.
to bring us back into a right relationship with Him.
And as we've been talking about,
Yeah.
that redemption,
Yeah.
it's not just about escaping punishment
No, it's not.
or avoiding consequences.
It's deeper than that.
It's about a change of heart.
A change of heart.
It's about aligning our desires
Our motivation.
with God's will.
It's about becoming more like Christ,
Absolutely.
reflecting His love and grace.
In everything we do.
Let's go back to Ahaz refusing to ask for a sign.
Okay.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
Seems like he's trying to be pious,
Humble.
but maybe there's something more to it.
Yeah, could be fear.
A fear of what he might see,
Maybe.
a reluctance to fully surrender to God's will.
You know, it raises an interesting question.
It does.
Are we open to receiving God's guidance?
That's a tough one.
Are we willing to trust Him even when it's hard
It's a challenge to let go of our own plans.
Our own ideas.
To surrender.
To surrender to something bigger than ourselves.
But that's the path to true freedom.
It is when we align ourselves with God's will.
When we let him guide us.
We tap into a power beyond our understanding.
And that's where the image of the child eating butter and honey comes in.
Right.
Discerning between good and evil, choosing the right path.
It reminds us that we have the capacity
Through God's grace.
to make good choices.
Choices that lead to life and
And
happiness.
wholeness.
And that discernment.
That ability to choose good.
It doesn't happen overnight.
It takes time.
It's a process.
It's a journey.
And it involves seeking God's guidance.
Through prayer,
Studying his word.
spending time with other believers,
And learning from our mistakes.
getting back up when we fall,
And trusting God.
trusting that he's working everything out.
You know, I'm struck by the tension between judgment and mercy
Yeah.
that we see in this chapter.
We see the consequences of disobedience, the impact of sin,
But we also see God's love,
his compassion, his forgiveness.
his willingness to redeem and restore.
It's like a tapestry.
The tapestry.
The dark threads of judgment interwoven with the bright threads of hope,
And that's what defines God's character.
justice, and grace.
And that's what gives us hope.
It does.
Even when we mess up,
God is a just God.
he holds us accountable. He loves us unconditionally. So even in the face of adversity,
Even when we make mistakes,
God is still there. He's working to redeem us.
to bring us into his kingdom.
And he invites us to join him in that work, to live lives that reflect his love. Thanks for joining us for this look at 2 Nephi 17.
It's been a pleasure.
Be sure to follow our podcast and subscribe for more.